views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Social Justice Forums. I am Daren, Jaime, and of course, we thank you for joining us. If anyone's asking what this show is actually all about, well, guess what? We bring you a deeper understanding of the social inequities that many people face, particularly in communities of color. We also provide a deeper understanding of the issues, and then we also try to promote, multiple points of view, as well as some civic and community engagement. So stay tuned, because the Social Justice Forum starts now. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference is a not-for-profit advocacy organization that's committed to nonviolent action to achieve social, economic, and political justice. The Sclc consists of localized chapters as well as affiliates located throughout the country and supports the organization by working in their respective communities, implementing national programs such as voter registration, improvement of education, and direct action against or inequitable treatment. They stand as an advocate for those who are on the margins of society. And if you want to know more about the Sclc, they do some great work in really providing a platform for racial justice as well as social justice and international human rights organization. Joining us to provide their point of view on the matter, I'm joined by a very special guest. We're pleased to be joined by the General Counsel at the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Sclc, Counsel Charles Brooks. And Counsel Brooks, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you taking out the time.
Well, we appreciate having the discussion. And when we talk about having a discussion, I think there's no more than a more seminal moment than what we're going through right now to really have the Sclc on our platform. I wonder if you will, just give us from your perspective, give us a little bit about your emotions and your thoughts as we're seeing continued topics of racial injustice, police brutality, things that the Sclc fought for years ago that still remain prevalent today.
Exactly. The troubling side is that the cyclical nature of what we're dealing with continues to happen again and again in terms of how we're dealing with basically lynching in 2020, which many people thought that they left behind and never really did. It just took on new forms and new aberrations in terms of its previous state. So in terms of what I find to be hopeful about it, because I don't want this to be a depressing story, is there are some drill downs on policy. So just kind of giving you a quick historical reference on it, 1866, the United States government said, hey, we got to do something with all these freed slaves. They wanted to pass all these laws. The president's like, nah, I don't want to do that. I don't want to provide those kind of protections. It led to concrete change, which was the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, which we use to this day. So if you fast forward today, there are some very good discussions from a legal standpoint to address qualified immunity. In the state of New York, the 48-hour rule, what it meant in the past, and in terms of how it affected people, in terms of you can't talk to a police officer or any witnessing police officer after a shooting for 48 hours to allow them to talk to police or talk to their lawyer or whoever they want to speak to. So some of the policy addressing, as opposed to just saying this is horrible, we need to change, that makes me very hopeful.
We are seeing change. I mean, right here in New York, we've got the 50A legislation. The governor signed that into law, put forth by legislators here. We are seeing a lot of progress. I know it's often said, the Sclc was also involved in a lot of the protesting, but also the policy and the advocacy. Speak to us for a minute. I talked to people about protest. I said protest is really about advocacy. But then when you talk about the other part, the strategy, and also coming forward with policy and advocacy also go hand in hand.
Exactly. Because the advocacy of passion without a plan doesn't really get you far. You have to have passion for how you want to change, passion about how you want to make a change to the community, but then let's lay out a plan to get there. Because you're just exhausted if you just come out and you're just angry and you don't focus it, as opposed to taking that anger and making that energy focused toward a result. And once you focus on having that result ultimately accomplished, that's what the Sclc was about. So going to some of the specific answers, both historically and in the past, just to kind of flash into history, because obviously there's a ton. dealing with SCLC. One of the most recent, which is kind of easy to quantify, is you had a county in Georgia in the 80s that didn't have any black residents. Well, now it has a lot. The reason was there was a march created by Reverend Lowry when he was the president of the organization in the 80s. That led to people talking about, okay, we'll now change the policies about who can live in this county. Well, now Forsyth, Georgia has a significant black population. So it was a wrong, it was a protest, it was a plan, and it yielded a result.
Talk to me about Kenosha, Wisconsin, Kenosha right now. As we're talking about Kenosha and looking out there in Kenosha, we're finding right now that a lot of people are still up in arms over the inequality that seems to be happening when it comes to a shooter. Here you have a young man who wanted to be a part of the deputized militia. The sheriff says, I'm not deputizing militia. He kills peaceful protesters at a Black Lives Matter rally. Yet and still, as you're going, or as a part of the Black Lives Matter movement, I should say, and then yet and still, when we see him walking, we're walking down with an armed rifle, and he's walking in front of police officers, and the police officers give him a pass. But yet and still, we know that if that's an African-American man who's walking armed, that's going to be a totally different story. The inequities between whites and blacks, particularly in the area of justice that leads to injustice. Give me your take on what and what your response to that is.
One of the age-old weapons of racism that I think gets overlooked on occasion is forming the narrative. In other words, what are the facts that suit my end result? And those are the facts that I'm going to talk about. So one of the facts that we go back to is people talk about the part of the video where two people are shot and they were like, well, the kid was running away. He shot to protect himself. That's a complete change of the actual fact. The reason why the two people that you see on a video or multiple people are rushing for him, he's already shot someone. A young man is sputtering on the ground, dying. He dies. And he runs, and the next set of people who are shot are actually rushing in because of the first shot. And I don't believe the first action was caught on video, or I've yet to see video that covers it. So in terms of the inequity of it, is you see that as an inequity unto itself. But then let's go back to another previous inequity. I believe your New York Post showed a picture of a young man cleaning buildings, though he was some kind of civic leader before the shootings took place. That was forming a narrative as to why you should be sympathetic to the shooter. And part of that is about some of the interviews he gave, I think, to the UK Daily Mail, where the young man talks about our job. We are here. So he was acting as a function of some organizational structure, no matter how loosely you want to fit it, vigilantism, militia, whatever. We know that there was a Facebook group that was formed shortly before the shooting, inviting assistance from our members. We know that there was an interaction with the police officers after the curfew. When the police are there to get people off the street, encounter a large number of white people with guns, and basically give them the okay and toss them water, giving them the authority to understand you have the ability to act in this space. I'm giving you that authority through action alone, because that's what we got to understand. Everything's not policy. Some things are what you do. So right. I say, I don't like you, but I put $1,000 in your pocket. I think you think I like you regardless. So we've got to move between what someone says and what somebody does in terms of finding out what was the true intent. And we can't allow narratives to form around facts that allow people to say this happened when we know it didn't. And we're seeing that all over. And to your point, that's not only Kenosha, that's Breonna Taylor, the names go on and on and on. And I think if you go back all the way back to Trayvon, now you begin to understand he wasn't allowed to tell his narrative. You only received one, and that's what the press carried, for the most part.
Charles Brooks is the general counsel for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and we have him here as our guest here on the Social Justice Forum, and it's an honor and a privilege to have him being able to share in on the discussion. And when we talk about social justice, we know that the SCLC is one of the background organizations, the foundational organizations for the social justice movement. For somebody who may be a viewer, and you know, part of our job as a journalist is you assume that your audience knows nothing. Please take the time to acquaint people with a little bit of the history of the SCLC. As we know, one of its original are the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Correct. You had a group of individuals coming together who are looking for direct action so that people can understand the difference. There are a lot of wonderful civil rights organizations of which African Americans were either formed part of the backbone of it or were certainly after its formation. As in W.E.B. Du Bois was one of the founders of the NAACP. So you had these multiple organizations working toward multiple issues because African Americans don't face one issue. We faced a host of issues related to economic justice, which you alluded to before, dealing with poverty, and also things dealing with police interaction, opportunity, redlining housing. So historically, you had a group that said, look, we need direct action. The other organizations I'm working on that are working in their way to try to address it. We need to have something that formally approaches what's going on and what's happening in that particular issue. And so you had other organizations, and I think one of the forerunners, the Montgomery Improvement Association, when Dr. Martin Luther King goes to Montgomery and works with a young lady by the name of Rosa Parks about dealing with how African Americans were being mistreated in the city. You had that formation of saying, hey, African Americans are going to be the ones on the front lines to help. Now, that doesn't mean that there weren't people of other races who were brought on board. There were other people who have died and perished, and it has some eerie allusions to this time period right now. You have Bill Luzo, who was killed in Alabama with the federal government a part of having at least somebody who's working with the federal government in the car that shot him. So not the exclusive issue in terms of African Americans, it's just that SCLC has been one that says we can take a leadership position to direct action to get the change to the policies and the laws that we want so that things can be more equitably assumed. Because part of it is, it wasn't just about, at the time, I think a lot of it appears to be about segregation and we want integration. Yeah, that's part of it, and that's a very strong part of what it's about. But once again, that's about a narrative being formed by what our intents were. At that time, the first time a white male was convicted for raping a black woman was in 1959 in the Barbara Owens case. SCLC was there. So there was a lot of global scope in terms of inequities, lynchings, extrajudicial killings that SCLC has been a part since 1957 when it was formed. So those are kind of issues that Dr. King and all his progeny in terms of the leadership until our present president, Dr. Charles Steele, who was in Wisconsin, I believe, this weekend. And so trying to address some of the issues in terms of what happened to the Blake family.
Yeah, give me a little bit more about what's happening right now, because as we talk about the SCLC, boots on the ground, a lot of issues to deal with. We talk about not just police brutality, which of course is at the forefront right now, but give a little bit to our viewers about what you're particularly working on in this time and season, given the climate.
In terms of this issue, let me answer that question in two parts.
Okay.
There's multiple areas that are being addressed. One of the most successful policies right now, and I would say right up until this year, I would have probably looked at our Roanoke Rapids program to get African Americans a part of the power line jobs. That has been an incredibly successful position because we established what are the items with less than a year's worth of education, non-college, can you make $100,000? And so we identified various jobs which fit that bill. And then there was some young men in the area that was very economically impoverished. And we began to get young individuals into it. And for the most part, it was male just because of the lifting requirements on the power line jobs. And so you went from the people, I think every last one of the guys who we had graduated from high school, were unemployed, all the ones who have completed the program, I think, make at least $60,000 a year, one of which is in his early 20s, making over $100,000 from a time period he was making nothing at all. So I would have been excited about that program. I would have been excited about our work trying to get minimum wage. But let me go to really what the heart of your question is about, is addressing police brutality right now. You've had activism on that issue going back a year, especially in my Miami SCLC chapter, dealing with inequities within the criminal justice system. And they're so mirrored and they're so splintered. Let me just give you one example. One of the things that's going on now is the question is, the shooter Rittenhouse, how did he get there? who helped him get there, and who was responsible and what happened in the interaction right before the first white male was shot, right? That issue is called felony murder. Most black people have heard about it. Somebody sitting in the car. I had nothing to do with the robbery. I just wanted to get a ride with Joe Schmo. I wasn't responsible. The cop says, you in the car. You were the lookout guy. You were the something. Felony murder, go away. That's pretty common in New York. That's pretty common across the United States. Well, why are we applying that standard there, but there doesn't seem to be a real rush to find out whether or not any other members of the militia / vigilante / whatever label you want to apply, who else was responsible with him in conjunction with him in that moment? Whose job, because he uses the phrase our job during the interview with the Daily Mail, I believe. Or the Daily Mail is running the interview.
Who are you representing?
Yeah, who do you represent? And if you represent a group, like, let's say it's a gang. If I say I represent Crips, and there's a bunch of Crips behind me, if I represent Latin Kings, there's a bunch of Latin Kings behind me, a bunch of Latin Kings get charged. So why is it that we don't have that scrutiny in this particular circumstance? Curious, you know. So not only are there questions about how this interaction works and what it's about, the question are questions for the DA and the question for the chief of police. Because this is the chief of police who sheriff's office, who talked a year in advance about shooting shoplifters. So your law and order, other than vigilantes, which you work with, see, no one should be above getting a pass, and that's about what the narrative is about. So now the focus is on Rittenhouse should be free. And of course, I believe there should be justice served for what Rittenhouse did. However, that should not be our only focus in this particular circumstance. Who were the other individuals? What did the police know? And how did the police act to give him authority, if they did? And those are not questions that I've drawn at this point in time, but I don't see those questions being asked, and that's very distressing.
We're dwindling down on our segment, but I do want to get to this point about the upcoming election. The SCLC is very boots to the ground on this issue too. Voting rights. When we see the voter suppression that's happening, mailboxes being taken away, the postal system it seems as though the voter suppression continues to rage, and that's something that the SCLC began its foundation on. Talk to us about the voting rights issue and where you guys are in terms of making your voice heard and what you want the public to know.
Yeah, first of all, I want to, before we close down, number one, in order to make your voice heard through the SCLC is addressing your issues, it's $25, even to the national office, make you an at-large member. And if there's membership in your area or another area of interest, you can join through that area. So we have a wonderful chapter in New Orleans, for instance. If maybe you had friends, or maybe somebody in the New York area went to school and some of the several HBCUs use theirs, Dillard or Xavier or Southern University of Louisiana, Southern University of New Orleans, and you want to join, you can join with that, and as an adult, it's $25. Because part of it is economic freedom applies to these organizations as well. Whether it's SCLC, NAACP, Urban League, NAN, whatever has your interest. But if you're not joining those organizations and you're not giving your money, you're saying that you think that the government can address these kind of problems for you. So don't give authority to the government under that association and then complain about the result. But going back to your issue in terms of voter suppression and issues with that, we've worked quite a bit, because one of the first things that we've said for a while was when the ruling from the Supreme Court came down from the Shelby case, Shelby County, Alabama, that it was essentially trying to reinstall segregation. And when we said that as an organization, we were basically, people went, oh, that's a joke, that's funny, voter suppression. Well, now everybody understands how real it is, how systemic it is, how that people are being oppressed in terms of their ability to get to the polls. So I would say two things can happen right now. A, I'd like to see you join the organization. B, it is very simple now in this world to send emails to your congressperson, to your senators. Even if you're in a very conservative area, you don't feel like your voice is being heard. You'd be surprised. When people are inundated with phone calls in their offices in DC, they want to know why. So in terms of voter suppression, you can say, hey, I want more handled in terms of questioning Postmaster General, because his answers have been, to say that they're grossly inaccurate to what's going on with the Postal Service is just, it's just bizarre, because the Postal Service financially has been historically very strong. And now this new argument, which is floated around for a little bit about, oh, the post office is help. Well, it's about voter suppression. And that voter suppression creeps in. It's an evil animal, and it's a way to keep you from moving forward. And I'm going to get into it real quick, and I'm going to go. William F. Buckley and James Baldwin were arguing about the Negro vote almost 60 years. It's over 60 years ago. We can't go back. This is not even about going forward. This is about holding ground. That's where we are right now. These issues are about holding ground.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we got a lot to talk about. Got to bring it back and we share a little bit more about what is going on. But thank you for taking the time to share a little bit. Before we get out of here, once again, for people who want to be part of the SCLC, there is this misnomer that you got to live in the South to be a part of the SCLC. I know the answer, but please give the people the answer and then tell them how they can be a part again.
Yes. If you want to be a part of the SCLC, it doesn't matter where you live. As a matter of fact, we have members overseas. Maybe you're watching this and hopefully your broadcast audience reaches out soldiers in Germany, South Korea, Italy. You can join, go to the website, National SCLC, and join and click in $25 and you're a member and your voice gets heard. Because part of it is, if you're the voice that's funding it, then it's an African-American voice in the room. And where the funding comes from can inflect how it reflects what the voice says and what it says about it. So you really have to think about that. And we're talking about $25 for a year. I think people can do it. That's not even remotely what most people pay in their cable or even their Roku charges for the or Netflix.
Yeah. Charles Brooks, General Counsel for the SCLC. Thank you so much for being with us here on the Social Justice Forum. A lot of enlightening information, and definitely you got to come back.
Thank you so much. I look forward to it, man. I appreciate it.
All righty. Listen, we encourage you, stay with us. We've got more social justice forums. If you want to find out more about the SCLC, please go to their website, find out the information. As he said, $25 just to join. We've got more show. Stay with us. We're coming right back right after this.
We know that people are dealing with the health crisis, but there's also a lot of food insecurity.
We're giving out healthy food options, and that's what's key here.
If you're a senior, you have a disability, they'll actually deliver meals to you.
The residents are anxious, they're worried, they're scared, they want to be tested.
When things were happening in our community and we couldn't get the help.
There's almost a presumption of criminality that attaches to your skin color.
The site will prioritize those who are at highest risk in the population.
If you feel symptoms and you'd like to visit one of these COVID-19 testing sites here in the Bronx, you may call the State Health Department's hotline.
Important to note about this site is no reservations are needed. This is a walk-in clinic.
A lot of us are out of work and looking for something to do.
We have the machinery and the skills to make large scale of these masks and gowns.
Take care of your people. It's going to go way further than we actually can understand.
Right now, employees like myself are just adjusting to the new reality.
Reporting from BronxNet, this is Trans.
It looks bleak. It feels bleak. But the city isn't shut down because our public services keep working. In spite of, and in the face of, the dangers, we can count on them. And to keep them working and funded now and in the future, we need to be counted. Self-respond now to the 2020 census at my2020census.gov.
And welcome back. BronxConnect is a community and faith-based program offering alternative justice, cure violence, and reentry programs, helping communities build from within. BronxConnect has served over 2,000 youth and also young adults in its alternative programs for court-involved high-risk youth. For nearly 2 decades, it's been the only Bronx-based, faith-based, and community-based alternative to incarceration and alternative to detention program that's actually serving our community. And joining us now to share a little bit on the matter and give their point of view and introduce us to BronxConnect, we are welcome to be joined by the Director of Development at BronxConnect, Pamela Villa. And Pamela, good to have you.
Hey, good to be here, Daren. Here.
Thank you. Yeah, it's good to be here. And I mean, we're virtual, but thank God you're there. I'm here. We're still able to bring information to the community with regards to social justice. So when we talk about social justice, one of the things that we really talk about is mass incarceration and how mass incarceration is oftentimes a part of that social justice. But you guys really do a proactive job of really trying to get there before incarceration and dealing with people who are, you know, in detention, but can also have some alternatives to incarceration. So introduce us to BronxConnect.
So BronxConnect was founded in 1999. And our mission is really it started off as keeping youth out of jail. And since then, we've also expanded and have also working with adults as well. And we do that through various different programs in the community. As you said, we provide alternatives. So when young people get involved in the court system, instead of sending them to prison or detention, New York City judges, and primarily we work in the Bronx and Harlem, they say, you know what, it's probably a better idea to keep that kid out of prison or jail. Let's keep them in the community. Let's send them to BronxConnect, where they'll be plugged into counseling, where their families will get support, where they'll, you know, get opportunities for employment, training, as well as actual ways like licensing for construction and all these other resources that are proven to actually help kids stay out of jail in the future.
And when we talk about kids staying out of jail, I think that's really what everybody would like to see. Certainly the bad people, of course, must be incarcerated, but a lot of kids in youthfulness, you know, I think about some of my youthful indiscretions. I could have been, you know, any one of us could be in a bad situation. But to have an alternative that's actually presented to us can actually make the difference. So tell me a little bit about the difference that you feel that this makes when you have these programs for kids who are possibly headed down the wrong path or who just simply made wrong decisions.
So science has finally kind of caught up to what our executive director, Reverend Wendy Calderon Payne, has been onto since we founded in 1999. And she founded BronxConnect because she believed in certain values around redemption and love and really loving on kids that said we've all made bad decisions and they deserved not really even a second chance, because sometimes it really is just the first chance to actually make things right. And so over the past 15 years, science has been catching up with increased technology and MRIs, and we're learning that kids and, you know, young people, even young adults to the age of 26, are at a very unique developmental stage where if you rehabilitate them and actually give them the supports that they need, they are more likely to end up having great life outcomes, which also benefits the community that they live in. It benefits their family. You know, the community is safer. And so the science is finally catching up. And there was a Supreme Court ruling that kind of helped drive this home, that ruled that it is unconstitutional to have kids basically under 18 get life without parole, because they don't have that consequential thinking that adults have. And so we really need to look at kids very differently. And really, to me, you know, the science says it's up to 26 years old. It's not even 18. So there's more work to be done on how we could help, you know, kids by using science and using evidence to increase public safety and to really support families and communities.
When we talk about advocacy, it's one of the most important things that I think happens inside that courtroom and even outside the courtroom, to advocate for young people and for those for alternatives to incarceration. Give us a little bit about what your thoughts are with regards to advocacy today and how it makes that difference.
Yeah, you know, when kids join our program, they are basically coming into a family of people that are going to be their allies, their advocates. They do everything in their power to make sure that that kid doesn't end up in detention or prison, because when they come in, if they don't follow their court mandate, if they don't make curfew, right, there's certain things that the judge says, okay, I'm going to let you stay in your community, but you have to do X, Y, and Z. And so our staff really goes above and beyond in helping basically meeting young kids where they're at in order for them to avoid that, you know, punishment of then getting wrapped up in the system. And so we do everything to not, you know, widen the net, so to speak, and to really keep kids out of prison, to advocate for them, to work with the court system, their public defenders, to do what we can to, I mean, sometimes it might require doing a home visit, you know, if the kid, for some reason, there's something going on in the home with the family, and it's not even really the kids' fault, that maybe they're under-resourced or there's issues going on, we will meet them in their homes to kind of do that case management and provide that counseling to help them out.
And when we talk about helping them out in programs, I want to talk about Rikers Island, because on this show we've been talking about Rikers Island and its closing. But in addition to its closing, I want you to know, I want our viewers to know that BronxConnect has really been involved in Rikers Island. I know in 2018 you launched a misdemeanor program, and that misdemeanor program really did some great things for kids. And I should say, not say kids, but really young adults. Tell people about the misdemeanor program.
So primarily before that, BronxConnect worked most heavily in our alternative justice program with violent kids that had committed violent felonies. And this program enabled us to work with more young people that had committed misdemeanors, but are really kind of like our sweet spot is really serious crime. So even in the misdemeanor program, we're talking about kids that have engaged in potentially violent crimes or just kind of more serious type of crimes, which makes BronxConnect pretty unique. There's a lot of programs around the city that do this type of work, but I think that kind of specificity in our program model has allowed us to get really good at working with those kids. And really amazingly, we had a study conducted recently and found that 97% of our kids that graduated from the program successfully from our alternative justice program, which includes the misdemeanor program, went 3 years without another conviction, without another felony conviction, which is, I think everybody, all cities across the US should be looking at alternatives, because I just think it's so much more effective than sending kids away.
Right. And when we talk about sending kids away, it's the hardest thing to do, but the criminal justice system, we know, has this issue of mass incarceration. And that could be a young person, that could be an adult, and particularly in communities of color, we know that there are disproportionate numbers of those of us who are in communities of color that end up in the criminal justice system, end up having to deal with this thing called mass incarceration. So talk to me about the work that's being done, outside of the four walls to really make the public, the community, and the nation aware as to some of the injustices and how programs such as yourself can really make the difference.
Thank you for asking that question. I think beyond our direct service, which has been what we've been doing for many, many years, in 2019, we formally launched an advocacy and organizing team to look at these systemic and policy issues at a much greater level. Our executive director had always been a huge proponent of alternatives. As you said, we were part of the Closed Rikers Coalition. We still are advocating to make sure that Rikers Island does close. But we've really gotten intentional about what can we do to increase power in the Bronx and Harlem to have kids advocating for their needs. We're training a group of 15 to 20 young people who have criminal justice involvement around organizing, advocacy, media, how to get their opinions out there, because we believe that that's really how you make a change. And we're going to be doing some interesting stuff at the state level around policy to protect kids, and would also be happy to talk more in depth about those things.
Yeah, we'll look forward to talking and have that conversation, because I think it's really important that and especially in this day and age with what we're facing right now, policies definitely have to change. Are you happy with what you're seeing right now in the terms of the social step up, if you will, the advocacy, the talk about against police brutality, all the things that's happening right now? Are you happy with what you're seeing by way of allyship and people really stepping up to this cause that really hits you right at your door?
Yeah, I am, and I think we're constantly bombarded these days with different calls to action, different initiatives that are being looked at, which is really, really great. And one of the things that we're really excited about is that we are going to have the opportunity to also launch in Philadelphia soon. And I think that the general, I hope that the general feeling in our country is that this system is not working. And I know that that's a very polarizing view. Some people may disagree, but we have seen firsthand how mass incarceration has destroyed our communities and how our, communities of color have seen disproportionate effects dating back to the 1980s when mass incarceration really kind of started to gear up. And through today, we're still seeing those effects. We've witnessed generations of primarily Black men but also Latino men and women of color being basically taken away from their communities. And that's not going to increase public safety, right? How can we actually think about public safety from a really kind of innovative and evidence-based way to help our communities?
What do you find are some of the biggest challenges that you're facing right now today?
I think with COVID-19 and what we're probably going to be seeing budget cuts across, we're already seeing citywide how budgets are being affected, revenues are down, both at the city and state levels. And so I think that's one of our greatest challenges. Proudly, BronxConnect managed to not fire anyone due to COVID-19 reasons, and not fire, but we didn't have to let anyone go. And
right.
that really goes to show that we have a really community level mindset where we're focused on developing community. And also most of our people, 25% of our full-time staff is formally incarcerated. So it's really important to us to make sure that they keep their jobs during this time. And so we're doing everything we can to support our families. We applied for some relief funding, which was really great. A lot of foundations did these rapid response relief efforts, which allowed us to put money directly in the pockets of our families, which was amazing. And we're hoping to continue to see that. I think the biggest challenge is we hope that this energy doesn't die down. We hope that foundations continue to recognize the need for immediate funding and direct funding for our kids beyond, the programs that we've always kind of provided.
Well, I think about where you are right now, and I think about the fact that, this advocacy is going on. It seems as though all cameras, all lights, camera action seems to be directed towards this issue of, policing, incarceration, the justice system. It seems as though it's almost like a seminal moment. Do you gather that it's almost like, it's almost like now or never to have massive change the way that we're talking?
I think so. And I think, beyond the politics and beyond all of the madness that is playing out at a national level, I'm really seeing people that previously were not concerned about these issues ask about them. People that were kind of on the political, in the middle of the road, moderate friends that, don't necessarily vote one way all the time, come and ask me about these issues. And they've these people have not worked in these spaces. They have been exposed to really seeing a lot of interest. And for me, it's how do we keep that going? How do we maintain that sense of urgency into the future? Because this is not going to be resolved even in a few years. This is really systemic, deep rooted stuff.
Yeah. And when you talk about that, I laugh because I'm like, there's a general enlightenment is what I call it, right? People are somewhat now more enlightened than ever before. But for those of us who've been doing the work and those of us who've been connected and reporting and, and living it out, this has been a day-to-day grind. Does it kind of surprise you now that the light is so all of a sudden turning on for more and more people?
Yeah, it's a little surprising for sure. I think, as much as social media scares me because of all the misinformation, there's that silver lining that I think people are being more exposed when bad things happen, when cops, kill people on the streets. I think people are finding out about it in ways that are a lot more visceral. Even, a few years ago, we got some of that footage starting, with, I think it was Tamir Rice, right? And, there wasn't footage for a lot of the other folks that were killed, last time when Black Lives Matter was basically founded. But there's that, I think people are feeling more committed to documenting and getting things on camera. And I think that is crucial. I think that is how we create change, because if people don't see it, then it becomes much easier to just brush it under the rug and, say, oh, that was just one cop. But when you're seeing video after video, you have to start asking yourself, what's going on?
Yeah. And before we go, please tell people how they can get connected to BronxConnect and the work that you're doing.
So I would encourage folks to either reach out to myself. My email is Pamela, Pamela, V as in Victor, @BronxConnect.org. Or they could also head over to our website, BronxConnect.org, and reach out to us that way as well.
All right. Well, Pamela, certainly it's great to have you sharing with us here on the show. Thank you so much for being with us here on the Social Justice Forums.
Thank you so much, Daren. Appreciate you.
All righty. Pamela Villa, our guest from BronxConnect. Listen, stay with us. We've got more show. We're coming right back right after this.
When taking public transportation, don't touch your phone.
Carry hand sanitizer and use it immediately upon leaving the bus or train. Avoid touching your face. If someone is coughing or sneezing, move away. Wash your hands with soap and water as soon as possible. Limit contact with poles. If possible, avoid rush hour. Don't eat or drink on public transportation. Keep your bag off the floor or other surfaces. Avoid directly touching turnstiles. Stay up to date with the latest from your local health department and CDC.
Most at risk for coronavirus: people over 65, people with underlying medical conditions like heart disease, chronic lung disease, asthma, diabetes, people undergoing cancer treatment, and people with weakened immune systems. What should you do if you or a loved one is at higher risk? Avoid close contact with people, avoid crowds, stay home if you can, wash your hands frequently. Learn more ways to protect yourself and others at coronavirus.gov.
And welcome back. As Rikers Island is set to close in the year 2026, elected officials and activists are hoping that the land will be used to environmentally benefit the city. Survivors of Rikers Island have demanded any future use of the island to help the communities who have been most harmed by mass criminalization, environmental injustice, and disinvestment. Low-income neighborhoods and communities of color are often home to waste transfer stations and other polluting infrastructure, which emit particulate matter and other toxins linked to respiratory illness, among other things. The Renewable Rikers Act aims to create a green vision for the 400-acre correctional facility that would keep the island out of the hands of luxury developers while lessening the burden on communities loaded with city infrastructure. Here to provide their point of view on the matter, I'm joined by Mott Haven-based social entrepreneur and activist, Ramona Ferreyra, and she joins us now. Ramona, good to have you.
Hi, how are you?
Thank you for sharing with us here. And, you know, there's no greater thing when we talk about social justice and also environmental justice. And when we come to the issue of Rikers Island, first of all, let me deal with the social justice component. Many people in favor of Rikers Island closing. And give me your thoughts now that we know that the building will be shutting down.
So for us, it has been just an amazing experience to see the mayor and the city council commit to shutting down what's really the last penal colony in America, and really be bold enough to redefine what criminal justice should look like in New York City. So the Closed Rikers program is something that I got involved in about 2 years ago, and I sit on the Neighborhood Advisory Council. So we are looking forward to the City Planning Commission voting to turn Rikers Island into a public space. That's a big first step for us to be able to get that land. And then our second goal is to make sure that the Renewable Rikers legislation passes. And that legislation turns that public land over to the Department of Environmental Protection. And it's gonna allow communities like Mott Haven, where I'm from, to really decide what we want to shift physically over to Rikers Island. I'll give you an example. We don't have a park in Mott Haven. The closest thing to us is St. Mary's, and it's a really long walk for people with mobility issues like myself or elders. And we are hoping that we can find either a waste management site or a water management site. There is a waste management site right by Mitchell Houses where I live that was placed there because this used to be industrial zoned, but now this is residential, and we really shouldn't have 150 garbage trucks driving through our community every single day. Waste Management is a good, community neighbor in that they maintain the area and they try to offset as much as possible their impact on the area. But you have a place called, the Asthma Alley for a reason. And the exhaust, the burden of the crossways, the burden of the Deegan, all of that, in addition to a location like Waste Management, really takes away from us an opportunity of having a public space. And they are on a waterfront lot that is spectacular. And I go there every single day and I envision and I try to share with as many people as possible the fact that we could actually take that facility and shift it out of Mott Haven with the closure of Rikers and end up with a brand new park for this community, a brand new waterfront park.
When you think about the whole asthma situation, give us a little bit more of a lay of the land, because I know that many Bronxites are familiar with all of the health concerns, particularly in that area. But what are you hearing? What are you knowing by way of the asthma and the other health disparities that are actually affecting? Because you do have so much hustle and bustle in that area around Rikers Island. You've got the trucks coming through, you've got buses coming through, you've got, heavy vehicles coming through, and all of that, that carbon emission is hitting the air.
Yeah, so when they first started designing the city, they really decided, Robert Moses, that this needed to be a point of connection to the city for folks that participated in white flight, if we want to be honest, right? So as folks started moving out of the city into Connecticut and, upstate, the Bronx Throwaways, so the Deegan, the Cross Bronx, the Bruckner became these really heavy polluted access points into Manhattan for those that commuted into Manhattan. And then Hunts Point Market, which is the largest food distribution facility in America, is also located in this neighborhood. So when you have infrastructure designed to bypass a community and use it as roads instead of, see it as the infrastructure for a community to live in, and then you add in retailers like Fresh Direct, like Amazon that just leased a second huge facility down in Port Morris, it really leads to the asthma rates that we see in this community being highest in, any county of New York. It's why we're 62 in Mott Haven out of all of the New York City counties. So we're number 62 out of 62. And if we think about COVID, we saw a lot of people in our community that were dealing with pre-existing conditions, respiratory issues, that we're just normally living with, not really understand and not really be educated properly on how living with a pre-existing condition like asthma or COPD was also a risk factor for COVID. So you have a huge concentration of public housing, which is falling apart. And inside has lead and asbestos and poor ventilation, and the air that seeps into your apartment is coming off these highways and these trucks. And then on top of that, you have the infrastructure surrounding you that was designed to really bypass you and to see you as, something that could be ignored as people commuted to something and from something.
When we talk about what people want today, particularly in that neighborhood, I know recently a conversation was had late July, and those conversations were had to really talk about the case for renewable Rikers, and those were community conversations, an opportunity to hear from residents exactly their thoughts. And so when you're hearing the lay of the land from people with boots on the ground, what are residents saying that they want, particularly now, particularly when it comes to the renewable Rikers Island plan?
I think folks are finally coming around to this idea of we get to design it, right? So once we get past the shock of we actually get to pick and choose what facilities get moved, there are questions that always come up regarding, well, we don't have a park. And we've always known that we have, a waste management plant. In Port Morris, there's 2. Over more into Salamanca's district, there's another one. So folks have always known, and different groups have been really active in the environmental justice realm, but there's never really been a mixture or a fusing of environmental and criminal justice advocates. And I think this is a really interesting opportunity for both sides, where I'm only comfortable in that space because I worked on disaster response for the Department of Defense. So I was already thinking of force and natural disasters as something that happened at the same time. So seeing that happen in the Bronx sort of makes me feel, or no, it totally confirms the fact that I needed to come home and do the work that I'm doing. But I think it's a really important opportunity for people that normally separate their advocacy work and think that the world is just within that column. So the criminal justice side, for them, it's really important that any green jobs that are created, because things are getting transferred into Rikers, are open to those that were previously held on Rikers. So when we talk about green job creation, one of the things that the community has said a lot is like, we want to make sure that you don't need a college diploma to do these things, because many of the men and women that have gone through Rikers in our community don't have that. So we're talking about how do we develop work that is more focused on trade and training versus education requirements. We've had a couple of interesting conversations, because some of the folks that like to think that they do environmental justice are really pushing solar panels. And interestingly enough, a few people in the community don't want solar panels there.
Wow.
They, solar panels take up a lot of space. There's one young man that I know that is a planner, and he's an engineer, and any chance he gets, he's like, look, those solar panels are going to take up a lot of land. They're not going to produce a lot of energy. There's other opportunities that, we could be looking at. And the actual Lippman report has some proposals as to how we could use barges for trash transfer that people are thinking is interesting, instead of using, trucks and making trucks go through here or Queens. So I think the first reaction is a little bit of surprise that the city is allowing them to have this kind of input. A lot of people were really concerned that the jail was not going to close and that we weren't going to get this far. But at each voting point, we, present the valid argument, one, for humanizing criminal justice in our communities, and through borough-based jails that are innovative and are built with a humane, people-first foundation. We think that you can do that. But then there are other people that, just want to think about, well, what about the environmental impact? And again, this really lets me marry both of those ends.
Yeah. I want to also switch fronts for a minute and talk a little bit about the MTA while we got you here. And knowing right now that where we are, we're in September, the MTA has definitely made some changes when it regards to fares. Used to have free ridership from March all the way up until August 31st. That's now ended. And so you got people headed back to paying fares and things of that nature. But give me your thoughts, your sentiments on the MTA ridership, what's happening in your area.
So the Writers Alliance, which is the group that folks can get involved in if they want to, do some actions around transit specific. We just had our meeting a couple of weeks back, and we spent some time talking about the fares coming back after August 31st, because right before the pandemic hit, we had talked with you about Fair Fares program, and how we had won the Fair Fares program, and how that gave New Yorkers below the poverty level half-price rides on transit. We had to stop doing outreach because we were going in person to train stations. So we had a full day at 149th Street where we were helping people sign up and giving them information about it, because we know that in communities like the South Bronx, where you have about 56% of people below the poverty level, the majority of my neighbors need this service. We are now trying to figure out how we can do outreach, and without the support of the MTA, because they really don't have the funding to do a robust marketing campaign for Fair Fares, the question is, how do we get that message out? Because the more people that get the Fair Fares card, the less the less fare evasion you're gonna see on public transportation. And what we don't want is to continue to see Black and brown people being stopped, detained, ticketed because of a $2.75 fare. There's also the concern of the budget. The MTA is facing a huge shortfall. And what we've been able to confirm through some ridership analytics is that they're not really adapting their distribution of services and assets to match the ridership need. So in communities like the Bronx and Highbridge, Concourse Village, you're seeing these communities being the first responders, right? And we saw that through the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
We're continuing to ride the buses at pre-pandemic levels in the Bronx. It's not empty. Every time you get on the bus, it's packed. But if you go into Midtown, if you go into the Upper West Side, if you go into these neighborhoods where, again, you had white flight, where people have left the city, have moved out, or have gone to their summer homes, you're running empty buses. So we were in conversations with the new president of the MTA, and we're trying to communicate with her regarding this distribution of assets, because we now know for facts, on facts-based analytics, that we have to be shifting how we move our assets around. And the MTA is not nimble. It just doesn't have a history of adjusting quickly. And there are ways where, within the constraints of the existing budget, communities like the Bronx should be getting and deserve to be getting more service than an empty bus route on, the Upper West Side, where folks are just not living there anymore.
Mm-hmm. So before we get out of here, I want to get you the opportunity to talk about people who want to become allies, because allyship is huge these days. You've got a couple of great initiatives that people are really dealing with. The community is really dealing with and grappling with, particularly with Rikers Island, and then also MTA ridership, and particularly as we talk about our community, right? So what if there's somebody out there that says, listen, I want to join the fight, I want to become a voice, an ally? How do they go about doing that?
So one of the places that would be easiest is to go into my Instagram, which is Ramona the Mona. So RAMONATHEMONA. And I post regularly, what events we're having and what's happening in each area that I focus on. And then organizations specifically that I can recommend folks follow if they're interested in seeing what's coming up. We're about to have a big celebration because we got a brand new bus lane on 149th Street, which is going to speed up traffic for bus riders tremendously and is really making a difference for the ambulance drivers there as well. So that would be Riders Alliance. They will announce their meetings. You can follow them on Instagram. They have websites, emails, and we do virtual meetings every month. And then when it comes to renewable Rikers and closed Rikers, that's just leadership.
Well, thank you, Ramona, for sharing with us. And of course, these are two topics that we're going to continue to follow here. And hopefully we'll be able to bring you back on the show and you can give us some updates on where things are.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks so much for having me.
Ramona Ferreyra talking about the work that's going on with renewable Rikers as well as the MTA. Well, unfortunately, we've come to the end of the show today. We hope that you had an awesome time joining us here on the Social Justice Forum, where we continue to bring you more information with regards to social justice on both a national and a local front. You can also catch the recablecast of this show right here on BronxNet TV and also on BronxNet.org. If you want to get any of those conversations or you want to add to the conversation, don't forget our social media platforms at BronxNet TV. And we encourage you, join us next week as we continue to elevate the conversation and the dialogue here on the Social Justice Forum. I'm Daren Jaime saying take care, God bless, and we'll see you real soon.